Chief Diplomatic Officer Marcus Thompson stared at the blinking red light on his desk console and wondered, not for the first time, how he'd managed to keep his job for 3 whole years. The light meant another complaint had been filed about his unique approach to interstellar relations. He'd started calling them his whoopsie reports. "Computer, play latest incident report," he said, leaning back in his chair and propping his feet on the desk. The harsh fluorescent lighting of his office aboard the Terran diplomatic station made the bags under his eyes look even darker than usual. A holographic display flickered to life, showing a very upset purple alien with what appeared to be ceremonial headwear, but Thompson knew was actually their equivalent of hair. The Graxian diplomat's tendrils quivered with barely contained fury. "This is High Council Member Zerk of the Graxian Cooperative. We must formally protest the actions of Diplomatic Officer Thompson during yesterday's first contact proceedings. When asked about Earth's defensive capabilities, he responded, and I quote, 'Oh, we're basically harmless. Unless you count that time we split the atom and accidentally invented a way to destroy entire cities. But hey, we only did that twice, officially.'" Thompson snorted. "That's not even close to the worst thing I said in that meeting." The recording continued. Furthermore, when questioned about human recreational activities, Officer Thompson proceeded to explain the concept of extreme sports, using interpretive hand gestures that our cultural experts have identified as highly threatening in 17 different star systems. "Not my fault they think jazz hands are a death threat," Thompson muttered, reaching for his coffee mug. The side of it read, "Earth, mostly harmless, usually." But most disturbing of all, the Graxian's voice had risen to what Thompson assumed was their version of a shriek. When presented with our traditional greeting gift of crystallized sugar formations, Officer Thompson demonstrated the human capacity to consume them by, and again I quote, "unhinging his jaw like a snake. Our xenobiologists are still in crisis counseling." Thompson grinned at the memory. The look on their faces when he'd popped the entire crystal cluster into his mouth had been priceless. How was he supposed to know they thought human jaws were fixed in place? The message concluded with what Thompson had come to recognize as the standard formal request for his immediate removal from diplomatic service. He'd started collecting them. This made number 47. A gentle chime indicated an incoming transmission. The face of his superior, Director Chen, appeared on screen. She wasn't smiling. She never smiled when calling Thompson. "Marcus," she said, in the tone of someone who had long since given up on maintaining their blood pressure, "would you care to explain why the Graxian High Council just classified humans as, and I'm reading this directly, a species of potentially carnivorous diplomats with disturbing masticatory capabilities?" "In my defense," Thompson sat up straighter, trying to look professional despite the coffee stain on his uniform, "they asked for an honest representation of humanity. I gave them one. Not my fault they can't handle the truth about our jaw muscles." Director Chen's eye twitched. "They're sending a cultural investigation team. Apparently, they don't believe humans could have achieved spaceflight, while being, as they put it, clearly in the early stages of tribal development. See? Problem solved. They think we're harmless primitives now. Isn't that better than them knowing about the reality of human history?" "Thompson," Director Chen's voice had that special edge that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "I'm sending Marine Sergeant Rodriguez to assist with the cultural exchange team's visit." Thompson's grin faltered. "Boom Boom Rodriguez? The one who got banned from 3 diplomatic functions for demonstrating human dancing techniques?" "The very same." "Director, you can't be serious. Last time Rodriguez had to explain human culture to aliens, they filed a petition to have Earth quarantined as a death world." "Exactly." Director Chen's smile finally appeared, and it was terrifying. "Consider this your punishment for the jaw incident. The Graxians arrive in 6 hours. Try not to start an interstellar incident before then." The transmission cut off, leaving Thompson alone with his thoughts and his rapidly cooling coffee. "Well," he said to the empty office, "at least it can't get worse than the time I had to explain why humans keep animals in their homes for entertainment." The red light on his console started blinking again. Computer, delete that last incident report, and get me the file on Graxian cultural taboos, specifically their views on interpretive dance. Standard operating procedures. Marine Sergeant Dana Boom Boom Rodriguez arrived exactly 5 hours and 59 minutes later, wearing a dress uniform that somehow made her look even more dangerous than combat gear. She carried a datapad in one hand and what appeared to be a rubber chicken in the other. "Sir," she announced, snapping to attention in Thompson's office, "request permission to demonstrate proper human military protocols to our alien visitors." Thompson eyed the rubber chicken warily. "What's with the tactical poultry?" "Visual aid, sir. Studies show that aliens respond better to demonstrations involving props." Rodriguez's face remained perfectly serious. "Also, it's technically not classified as a weapon in any known system." "That's not as reassuring as you think it is, Sergeant." Thompson sighed, already imagining the upcoming incident reports. "What exactly did Director Chen tell you about this assignment?" Quote, "Make sure they understand humanity's potential for creative problem-solving." End quote. Rodriguez's grin would have made a shark think twice. She also mentioned something about jaw muscles. Before Thompson could respond, his console chimed. The Graxian Cultural Investigation Team had arrived. All 12 of them filed into his office, their purple tendrils swaying in what their cultural brief described as scientific excitement. The lead investigator, whose nameplate helpfully translated as "most curious about primitive species," stepped forward. "Greetings, potentially carnivorous diplomatic representative Thompson," they said, carefully maintaining what they probably thought was a safe distance. "We have come to document your species' charming pre-spaceflight customs." Rodriguez's eyebrow twitched. Thompson quickly stepped in before she could demonstrate any of humanity's more creative customs. "Welcome to Earth's diplomatic station," he said, carefully keeping his jaw movements minimal. "Allow me to introduce Marine Sergeant Rodriguez, who will be explaining our military traditions." The Graxians' tendrils all perked up simultaneously. "Ah, yes, your ceremonial guardians. We have observed their ritualistic movements during what you call patrol duty. Most fascinating, almost like a primitive war dance." Rodriguez's other eyebrow joined the first. "Sir," she said, her voice suspiciously calm, "permission to demonstrate proper military drill procedures?" Thompson knew that tone. It was the same tone she'd used before the infamous interpretive history of human warfare incident that had caused 3 different species to request emergency evacuation protocols. "Granted," he said, "because at this point, why not? Just try to avoid any demonstrations involving explosions this time." Rodriguez smiled. It was not a reassuring expression. "Of course, sir. I'll stick to the basics, starting with how humans developed weapons before agriculture." The lead Graxian researcher's tendrils curled in confusion. "Surely you mean after agriculture. All civilized species developed farming before tools of conflict." "Oh no," Rodriguez said, holding up the rubber chicken with the air of someone about to start an interstellar incident. "We figured out how to kill things way before we figured out how to grow things. Humans are funny like that." Thompson watched as the Graxians' color shifted from purple to a concerning shade of lavender. One of them was taking notes so frantically their datapad was smoking. "In fact," Rodriguez continued cheerfully, "I've prepared a presentation on human military history. Chapter 1, Why Everything is Technically a Weapon If You're Creative Enough." The Graxians huddled closer together, their tendrils intertwining in what Thompson recognized as their species' version of nervous fascination. The one taking notes had switched to recording video. "Now pay attention," Rodriguez said, assuming a parade rest stance with the rubber chicken held at regulation height. "This is important for understanding human standard operating procedures. Let's start with the concept of improvised weapons using this Class 3 non-lethal training aid." Thompson sat back in his chair and pulled up a fresh incident report form on his console. He had a feeling he was going to need it. Cultural exchange gone wrong. 3 hours into Sergeant Rodriguez's presentation on human military history, The Graxian research team had filled 17 datapads with notes and gone through what Thompson assumed was their species' version of an existential crisis at least twice. The rubber chicken had been officially classified as a Class 7 cultural artifact of significant strategic value. And that's why humans invented the pointy stick before we figured out how to plant crops, Rodriguez concluded, finally setting down the chicken. Any questions? Every tendril in the room shot up simultaneously. Yes, the lead researcher's voice had taken on a slightly hysterical quality. But why would you need 37 different ways to sharpen a stick? Efficiency, Rodriguez replied with a shrug. Also, we got bored. The Graxians' note-taking reached a frenzied pace. The one who'd been recording video had to switch to their third backup device after the first two overheated. Perhaps, Thompson interjected, sensing impending diplomatic disaster. We should move on to the cultural exchange portion of today's program. Rodriguez's face lit up in a way that made Thompson immediately regret his suggestion. Excellent idea, sir. I've prepared an interpretive dance about the historical development of human warfare. Sergeant, Thompson said carefully, remember what happened last time you performed the evolution of nuclear physics through interpersonal movement. Don't worry, sir. I've modified the choreography. No high kicks this time. The Graxians, who had been furiously documenting every word, suddenly perked up. Your species uses ritualized movement to record historical events? How charmingly primitive. Please demonstrate this tribal custom. Rodriguez squared her shoulders and moved to the center of the office. This first sequence represents the discovery of gunpowder. What followed would later be described in official Graxian anthropological records as a deeply disturbing display of coordinated limb movements, suggesting an unprecedented understanding of controlled chemical reactions. 3 more datapads overheated. Notice how the arm movements represent the transition from black powder to modern explosives, Rodriguez narrated, performing what looked suspiciously like the Macarena. This part here symbolizes humanity's first attempts at achieving powered flight. Fascinating, the lead researcher breathed, their tendrils weaving complex patterns that their cultural brief identified as academic excitement bordering on religious experience. And these movements indicate your species' early attempts at tribal warfare. Oh no, Rodriguez said, transitioning into what Thompson recognized with horror as the electric slide. This represents our current military capabilities. I haven't even gotten to the historical stuff yet. The Graxian team huddled together, tendrils intertwining in a pattern that suggested they were rapidly re-evaluating several fundamental assumptions about the universe. The one still taking notes had switched to making detailed sketches of Rodriguez's movements, complete with trajectory calculations. Now pay close attention to this next sequence, Rodriguez announced, assuming a stance that Thompson had seen right before the Arcturian embassy incident. This represents humanity's relationship with thermonuclear physics. Sergeant, Thompson interrupted quickly, perhaps we should save the nuclear physics dance for after lunch. I believe our guests might appreciate a break to process all this cultural information. The lead researcher's color had shifted to a pale lilac that their brief hadn't mentioned. Yes, a pause in data collection would be prudent. We need to update our species classification protocols and possibly our defensive guidelines. Lunch it is then, Thompson said brightly, pretending not to notice how the Graxians flinched when he smiled. I believe the cafeteria is serving something special today. Sergeant, would you care to explain Earth's culinary traditions to our guests? Rodriguez picked up the rubber chicken with renewed enthusiasm. Of course, sir. I've prepared a comprehensive presentation on human dietary adaptations, starting with our ability to derive nutrition from substances other species consider toxic. Toxic, one of the Graxians squeaked. Oh yes, Rodriguez said cheerfully. Wait until you hear about coffee and hot sauce. Sometimes we combine them. Thompson watched the Graxian's color cycle through several previously undocumented shades of purple and started drafting his incident report. He had a feeling the cultural exchange gone wrong file was about to get a lot thicker. The Geneva suggestion, the diplomatic station's cafeteria, had seen its share of interspecies incidents, but Thompson was pretty sure this was the first time anyone had ever tried to explain human history through the medium of food arrangement. Rodriguez had constructed what she called an accurate tactical representation of the Battle of Waterloo, using 3 plates of spaghetti, 5 dinner rolls, and what might have been a meatball. "See, the sauce here represents the cavalry charge," she explained, gesturing with her fork in a way that made the nearest Graxian researcher flinch. "And this breadstick is Napoleon." "Your species records military conflicts through edible dioramas." The lead researcher's tendrils were twisted in what their brief called scholarly confusion with hints of existential dread. "Oh no, this is just for fun," Rodriguez said cheerfully, rearranging the meatball. "Usually we write everything down in these neat documents called the Geneva Conventions. They're basically a list of things we all agreed not to do in war anymore. Most of the time." The cafeteria went suddenly dramatically quiet. Even the ever-present hum of the ventilation system seemed to pause. You have documents listing prohibited combat actions?" A different Graxian spoke up, their colour shifting to what Thompson recognized as their species equivalent of pale shock. "And you needed multiple conventions to create these lists?" "Well, yeah," Rodriguez said around a mouthful of tactical spaghetti. "How else would we keep track of all the war crimes? I mean, you can't avoid committing them if you don't know what they are, right?" Thompson watched in fascination as the entire Graxian research team simultaneously changed colour to a shade their cultural brief specifically noted as reserved for moments of profound cultural revelation or severe gravitational disturbance. "To clarify," the lead researcher said carefully, their voice hitting notes Thompson hadn't thought possible for their species, "your civilization developed specific rules about what constitutes unacceptable behavior in warfare because you kept inventing new forms of combat that required regulation." "Exactly," Rodriguez beamed, stabbing her fork into the breadstick Napoleon with perhaps unnecessary vigor. "There's this great story about the time humans were specifically banned from using angry bees as weapons. Want to hear it?" "I believe," the lead researcher said, their tendrils now coiled so tightly they resembled a spring about to snap. "We need to update our classification of human military capabilities. Immediately." One of the other researchers was frantically entering data into their pad, muttering something that translated roughly as, "They weaponized insects before developing space travel," over and over. "Oh, if you think the bees thing is interesting, wait until I tell you about the time we had to specifically ban orbital bombardment using tungsten rods," Rodriguez continued, now using her spoon to demonstrate trajectory paths. "We called it the Rods from God project. Had to ban it before we even invented it, just to be safe." Thompson watched as the Graxians' collective colour shifted to what he could only describe as tactical lavender. He noticed several of them were now taking notes with shaking appendages, and at least one appeared to be drafting what looked suspiciously like an emergency evacuation request. "Sergeant," he said, trying to head off another potential interstellar incident, "perhaps we should save the rest of humanity's military history for after dessert." "Good point, sir," Rodriguez agreed, surveying her now thoroughly reorganized spaghetti battlefield. "They should probably hear about the War of the Bucket after they've had some sugar in their system. It's a lot to process on an empty stomach." "The War of the what?" one of the Graxians squeaked. "Oh, it's this great story about how humans once fought an entire war over a stolen bucket. Really showcases our problem-solving approach to conflict resolution." Rodriguez paused thoughtfully. "Though I suppose it's less about the bucket and more about the principle of the thing." The lead researcher's tendrils had gone completely rigid. "Your species initiated large-scale military operations over a water transportation device?" "Well, when you put it that way, it sounds ridiculous," Rodriguez said, somehow making it sound even more ominous. "Would it help if I explained it through interpetive dance?" Thompson quickly stood up, recognizing the signs of impending diplomatic catastrophe. "I think what Sergeant Rodriguez is trying to convey is that humans have a very diverse approach to military strategy," and conflict resolution. Very diverse, Rodriguez agreed cheerfully. Did you know we once trained dolphins for naval warfare? And that's not even the weirdest animal we've militarized. Wait until you hear about the anti-tank dogs. The Graxian recording all this had finally run out of datapads and had resorted to writing on their own tendrils. Thompson noticed they were also slowly but deliberately moving toward the nearest emergency exit. Perhaps, the lead researcher said in a voice that suggested they were reconsidering every life choice that had led them to this moment. We should proceed with our scheduled inspection of your station's defensive capabilities. Rodriguez's smile widened in a way that made Thompson wish he'd called in sick today. Oh, you're going to love this. I've prepared a special demonstration of standard human security protocols, using only items found in this cafeteria. Technically not a war crime. In retrospect, Thompson realized he should have been more suspicious when the Graxians suddenly developed an intense interest in the station's primitive defense systems. The first clue was probably when they started asking extremely specific questions about response times to hull breaches. The second clue was definitely when their cultural research vessel deployed what they claimed were standard data collection arrays that looked suspiciously like weapon systems. The third and final clue came in the form of an officially transmitted declaration of peaceful annexation for your own protection. Sir, Rodriguez said calmly, mixing hot sauce with her third cup of coffee, as warning klaxons blared throughout the station. I believe we're about to experience what humans technically classify as a diplomatic disagreement. Thompson watched as the massive Graxian warship that had been hiding behind their research vessel moved into position. You know, Sergeant, I'm starting to think they weren't actually interested in human interpretive dance. Shocking, sir. Rodriguez had begun constructing something using plastic cutlery, napkin dispensers, and what appeared to be the entire station's supply of rubber bands. Permission to demonstrate proper human emergency protocols. You mean the ones that aren't technically classified as war crimes? Exactly, sir. She held up her improvised creation with pride. Did you know that with the right motivation, a cafeteria tray can become a surprisingly effective tactical shield? The station's AI announced that the Graxians had begun their completely peaceful and definitely not hostile boarding action through Airlock 7. Thompson could hear their troops advancing down the corridor, probably expecting to find primitive humans cowering in fear. What they found instead was Sergeant Rodriguez standing in the middle of the cafeteria with a smile that would have made a shark file for a restraining order. Welcome to your first lesson in human defensive tactics, she announced to the bewildered Graxian soldiers. Today's topic, why Earth is classified as a death world and other fun facts about human survival instincts. The lead Graxian commander's tendrils twitched in what their cultural brief described as confident superiority with a hint of administrative satisfaction. Surrender peacefully, primitive ones, they announced. We have analyzed your species' capabilities and determined that you pose no significant threat. Your weapons are clearly inferior to our advanced technology. Rodriguez's grin somehow got wider. Sir, she said to Thompson without taking her eyes off the Graxians, permission to demonstrate why humans invented 37 different ways to sharpen a stick? Granted, Thompson sighed, already drafting the incident report in his head. Just try to keep the property damage to a minimum this time. No promises, sir. Rodriguez held up her cafeteria-based arsenal. Now, who wants to learn about human improvised warfare techniques? First lesson, why you should never underestimate a species that invented weapons before agriculture. The Graxian commander raised what might have been an eyebrow. You intend to resist our advanced military forces with eating utensils? Oh no, Rodriguez said cheerfully. I intend to demonstrate why humans are the only known species that had to create an entire set of laws, specifically banning creative uses of condiments in combat situations. Thompson watched as she proceeded to do exactly that. He had to admit he'd never seen hot sauce used quite so innovatively before, or rubber bands employed with such tactical precision. The thing she did with the napkin dispenser would probably be classified as a war crime if anyone had ever thought to specifically prohibit it. The Graxian soldiers, who had expected an easy victory over primitive humans, instead found themselves facing what their after-action reports would describe as a terrifying demonstration of why Earth's classification as a death world was drastically undersold. And that, Rodriguez announced to the thoroughly demoralized Graxian troops now huddled in the corner, is why humans invented warning labels. Any questions? Every tendril in the room drooped in unanimous surrender. Aggressive negotiations? Director Chen's holographic form flickered as she stared at Thompson and Rodriguez. Her expression caught somewhere between exasperation and reluctant admiration. The Graxian High Council representatives, watching from a split screen and still sporting several condiment-related stains, had been cycling through various shades of distressed purple for the past 20 minutes. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Chen said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "The Graxians attempted a hostile takeover of our diplomatic station." "A peaceful annexation," the High Council representative corrected weakly. "And Sergeant Rodriguez defended the station using only items found in the cafeteria?" "Technically," Thompson interjected, "some of those items weren't originally in the cafeteria. The rubber chicken, for instance." "I don't want to know about the rubber chicken," Chen interrupted. "What I want to know is how this ended, with the Graxian Cooperative requesting immediate admission to the Human Defense Alliance." Rodriguez stood at perfect attention, somehow managing to look professional, despite the hot sauce stains on her uniform. "Simple tactical demonstration, ma'am. I merely explained that what they witnessed was approximately 0.3% of humanity's actual combat capabilities, using only non-military grade condiments and plastic utensils." The Graxian representatives' tendrils twisted in what their cultural brief described as profound existential recalculation. And Thompson added helpfully, "That was before she explained our actual military protocols or showed them the historical archive of human conflict resolution techniques." "The archive labeled Geneva Suggestion?" one of the Graxians asked, their voice hitting a note previously thought impossible for their species. "That's the one," Rodriguez confirmed cheerfully, "though we only covered the first few centuries. Didn't even get to the really interesting parts." Director Chen's eye twitched. "And this led to their request for alliance? How exactly?" The lead Graxian representative's color shifted to what Thompson had learned was their equivalent of emergency bureaucratic override. "We have conducted a thorough analysis of human military potential and reached several concerning conclusions." "Oh?" Chen raised an eyebrow. "Firstly," the Graxian continued, tendrils weaving complex patterns of diplomatic distress, "any species that requires multiple international conventions just to keep track of prohibited combat techniques is clearly operating on a level of tactical innovation that we had not previously thought possible." "To be fair," Rodriguez interjected, "most of those rules were made after someone tried it at least once." The Graxian's color somehow managed to pale further. "Secondly, we have determined that an alliance would be mutually beneficial, as it would guarantee that humans would be legally obligated to explain their military protocols to us before implementing them. Particularly the ones involving condiments," another representative added, absently rubbing at a hot sauce stain. "And finally," the lead Graxian concluded, "we believe it would be in everyone's best interest if humanity's creative approach to problem-solving was officially classified as a strategic asset, rather than a potential threat to galactic stability." Director Chen stared at them for a long moment. "And this has nothing to do with Sergeant Rodriguez's offer to demonstrate historical human siege techniques using only items from the maintenance closet." "We would prefer not to discuss the maintenance closet incident," all the Graxians said simultaneously. Thompson pulled up the alliance treaty on his datapad, trying not to smile. "They've already signed the preliminary agreement. There's just one small addition they've requested to the standard terms." "Which is?" "A formal classification of the rubber chicken as a restricted tactical implement." Chen looked like she was getting a headache. "Do I want to know why?" No, ma'am, Rodriguez said promptly, but I can demonstrate if you'd like. That won't be necessary, Sergeant. Chen sighed deeply. Thompson, process the Alliance paperwork. Rodriguez, please refrain from any further demonstrations of human military history through interpretive dance or creative use of dining implements. Yes, ma'am. Should I cancel the scheduled presentation on human sports, then? I was going to explain hockey. The Graxian's tendrils coiled in synchronized alarm. Perhaps, Thompson suggested diplomatically, we should save the explanation of human recreational violence for after the Alliance is formally ratified. Agreed, the lead Graxian said quickly. We will need time to update our species classification protocols and possibly reinforce our cultural exchange facilities. As the transmission ended, Thompson turned to Rodriguez with a grin. I think that went rather well, all things considered. Indeed, sir. Should I prepare the standard post-first contact briefing? I have a great presentation on human medical techniques. Did you know we invented anesthesia after we invented surgery? Thompson watched the message light on his console begin blinking with what he assumed were urgent requests for clarification from various galactic diplomatic offices. Maybe we should let them process the whole weapons before agriculture thing first, he suggested. Besides, I need to update the station's cultural exchange protocols. Oh? Yes, from now on all rubber chickens must be registered as Class 7 tactical implements. Director's orders. Rodriguez smiled. If they think the rubber chicken is dangerous, wait until they learn about mini-golf. Thompson began drafting a new incident report, already imagining the color the Graxians would turn when they discovered humanity's approach to recreational sports. Some things, he decided, were best left for the second cultural exchange meeting, or possibly never. Definitely never if Director Chen had anything to say about it.